Could we build self-replicating nanobots? The short answer is not anytime soon. The long answer is a lot more complicated. It touches on biology, physics, computer science, and our deepest fears about technology. The idea itself is simple. You build one tiny machine, a machine so small you can't see it. This machine has two jobs. First, do something useful. Second, build a perfect copy of itself. Then that new machine does the same, and so on. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4. 4 become 8. It's exponential growth. It's the same magic trick that life uses to fill the planet. This idea is most famous for its nightmare scenario. People call it the gray goo problem. Imagine these nanobots are designed to eat carbon to replicate, and they are released into the world. They start eating a leaf, a blade of grass. They turn that carbon into more nanobots. Soon, a patch of ground isn't green anymore. It's a dull, lifeless gray. This gray patch grows. It consumes trees, animals, buildings, everything made of carbon, which is pretty much all life and a lot of our world. In a matter of days, the entire surface of the Earth can be converted into a churning, seething mass of trillions upon trillions of microscopic machines. A uniform gray goo. The end of everything. It sounds like science fiction, and for now, it is. But the concept isn't just fantasy, it's rooted in real scientific principles. The man who first seriously considered this was K. Eric Drexler. In his 1986 book, Engines of Creation, he laid out a vision for molecular nanotechnology. He imagined building machines at the atomic level. Assemblers, he called them. Tiny robotic arms that could grab individual atoms and place them precisely where they needed to go. With this, you could build anything. You could build diamonds stronger than steel. You could build tiny computers beyond our wildest dreams. You could build medical robots to patrol our bloodstream and fix cells one by one. And to make this technology cheap and abundant, he realized these assemblers would need to be able to build copies of themselves. It was a logical step. If you want to build big things with tiny machines, you need a lot of tiny machines. The fastest way to get a lot of them is to have them replicate. But he also saw the danger. He dedicated a whole chapter to it. He knew that a machine designed to replicate using the common elements around it could be a world-ending threat if it got out of control. He wasn't predicting doom. He was issuing a warning. He was saying, if we ever go down this road, we have to be incredibly careful. So, let's break it down. What would it actually take to build one of these things? Not the gray goo, just a single self-replicating nanobot. What are the parts? What are the problems? First, you need a body, a structure. What would it be made of? Most popular idea is something called diamondoid. It's a material made mostly of carbon atoms, arranged in a crystal lattice like a diamond. It would be incredibly strong and stable. Perfect for a tiny machine. The parts would be gears, levers, and casings, all made of interlocking carbon atoms. We know this is physically possible, diamond exists, but we have no idea how to build complex machinery out of it on an atomic scale. We can make tiny sheets of graphene, which is a single layer of carbon atoms. We can make carbon nanotubes. But a tiny, functioning gearbox, we're not there yet. That's the first massive hurdle. The basic manufacturing. We don't have the tools to build the toolmaker. Next, you need a computer. The nanobot needs instructions, a blueprint. It needs to know how to build a copy of itself. This is a huge information problem. The blueprint for a machine complex enough to replicate itself would be enormous. Think about DNA. It's the instruction manual for a living cell. A single human cell's DNA has about 3 billion letters. It's an incredibly dense and efficient information storage system. We need to invent something similar for our nanobot. Maybe a long, tape-like molecule, a sort of nano hard drive that a tiny reader could scan. And this computer can't just store the blueprint, it needs to execute the instructions. It needs to control the nanobot's actions, find materials, move its arms, assemble the parts of its child. This requires computation. We can make very small computer chips, but a computer small enough to fit inside a nanobot, powerful enough to direct its own replication, is far beyond what we have now. The components of our current computers are still massive compared to the scale of a single molecule. Then you need the tools. The nanobot needs its own little factory. This is the assembler part. Tiny robotic arms, maybe just a few molecules long, that can grab atoms from the environment. They'd have to be able to identify different types of atoms: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, silicon. Then they'd have to place them in exactly the right spot to build a new nanobot structure. This is where the physics gets really weird and difficult. At our human scale, gravity is the main force we deal with. We don't worry about things randomly sticking together. At the nanoscale, that all changes. And gravity is almost irrelevant. The dominant forces are things like van der Waals forces and electrostatic charges. These are the forces that make things sticky. Imagine trying to build a Lego castle while wearing oven mitts covered in honey. Everything sticks to everything else. Parts won't let go of the robotic arm. Parts will stick together in the wrong way. They call this the sticky fingers problem. It's one of the biggest, most fundamental challenges in molecular manufacturing. Nature solved it. Enzymes in our cells handle molecules all the time, but they do it in a very specific, watery environment, and they are floppy, flexible proteins that have evolved over billions of years to do one specific job perfectly. Building a rigid, general-purpose robotic arm that can handle individual atoms without getting stuck is a problem we have barely begun to solve. So you have a body, a computer, and tools. What else? You need energy. The nanobot needs a power source. Building molecules takes energy. Breaking them down can release energy. Our bodies run on chemical energy. We eat sugar and fat, and our cells burn it to power themselves. A nanobot would likely have to do the same. It would need to find fuel molecules in its environment, break them down, and store that energy in a sort of nano battery. Or it could use that energy directly to power its assembler arm. This is a thermodynamic problem. The nanobot has to be energy efficient. It has to get more energy from its fuel than it spends catching the fuel and replicating. If it runs at an energy deficit, the whole process grinds to a halt. Again, biology is the master of this. A simple bacterium is a marvel of energy efficiency. We would have to engineer a system that is just as good, or better, from scratch. And finally, you need raw materials. The nanobot has to build its copy out of something. This is the key to the gray goo scenario. For a nanobot to be a real threat, it has to be able to use common, abundant materials. It can't rely on some rare isotope that you have to feed it in a lab. It needs to be able to eat dirt, or water, or biomass. That means it needs a way to break down existing molecules into their component atoms. This is a messy, energy-intensive process. It would need a whole chemical refinery plant packed into its tiny body. It would need to sort the atoms it wants from the ones it doesn't, and it needs to do all of this without destroying itself in the process. So, let's recap the shopping list for a single self-replicating nanobot. You need a super strong body made of precisely arranged atoms. You need a tiny computer with a massive instruction set. You need robotic arms that can move atoms without getting stuck. You need a power plant that can extract energy from the environment, and you need a chemical plant to get your raw materials. We are not close to building any of these things, not in an integrated autonomous package. We have made some progress on the components. Scientists have built molecular scale motors that can spin. They have built DNA origami that can fold into tiny boxes. They have even made a tiny car with wheels made of single molecules. These are incredible achievements. They are the building blocks. But it's like saying we've invented the screw and the gear, and now we are ready to build a self-replicating Swiss watch. The gap in complexity is staggering. But let's say we solve all those problems. Let's say in 100 years or 500, we figure it out. We build the first one, we put a drop of solution containing a few thousand of them on a table. What happens next? The process begins. Each nanobot finds the materials it needs. Maybe it breaks down the wood of the table, or maybe it just uses the carbon in the air. It follows its instructions, it builds a copy. This process takes time. Let's say it takes 1 hour for a nanobot to make a copy of itself. This is called the doubling time. After 1 hour, you have twice as many. After 2 hours, 4 times as many. This doesn't sound very fast, but exponential growth is deceptive. After 10 hours, you have about 1,000 nanobots. After 20 hours, 1,000,000. After 30 hours, 1,000,000,000. After 40 hours, 1,000,000,000,000. They are still completely invisible. 1,000,000,000,000 nanobots might just be a tiny speck of dust. But the process continues. After about 60 hours, 2.5 days, you would have enough nanobots to weigh about 1 kilogram. Now you can see it, a small growing gray pile. After 80 hours, it's 1,000 kilograms. A ton. After 100 hours, it's 1,000,000 tons. In less than 5 days, the mass of nanobots would outweigh the entire Earth. This is the power and the terror of exponential growth. It starts slow, and then it becomes an explosion. This is the classic gray goo scenario, but is it realistic, even if we could build the initial bots? Many scientists today think it's not. They argue that the simple, clean math of exponential growth ignores the messy reality of the physical world. First, there's the energy problem again. All that chemical activity would generate a huge amount of waste heat. A rapidly growing mass of nanobots would essentially cook itself. The heat would build up so fast, it would destroy the nanobots before they could get very far. They would need a very sophisticated cooling system, which adds more complexity and requires more energy. Second, there's the resource problem. Raw materials aren't just lying around in a perfectly usable form. The elements a nanobot needs might be scarce in one place and common in another. Carbon is everywhere, but it's often locked up in very stable molecules. Breaking those bonds takes time and energy. The nanobots would have to spend a lot of their time just searching for food. This would slow down their replication rate dramatically. The doubling time might not be 1 hour, it might be 1 day or 1 week. That makes the whole scenario much less explosive. Third, there's the problem of motion. How do the nanobots move around to find new resources? They could have tiny propellers or legs, but moving at the nanoscale is like swimming through molasses. It's very difficult. Or they could just rely on being carried by the wind or water. In that case, their spread would be limited by the weather. They wouldn't be a uniform, advancing tide of gray. They'd be more like a kind of pollution or a weird form of dust. And finally, there is the problem of evolution. The nanobot's computer would need an error correction system. If it makes a mistake when copying its blueprint, you get a mutation. Most mutations would be bad. The new nanobot would be a dud. It wouldn't work, or it wouldn't be able to replicate. These would just become inert dust. But what if a mutation was accidentally beneficial? What if it made the nanobot better at surviving? This is where things could get strange. You could have competing strains of nanobots. Some might be better at finding energy. Some might be better at fighting off other nanobots. You wouldn't get a uniform gray goo. You would get an entire ecosystem of artificial life locked in a war for resources. It's a different kind of apocalypse, not a simple conversion of matter, but a new, chaotic, and uncontrollable form of evolution. A gray plague instead of a gray goo. Because of all these practical limits, many people who work in nanotechnology don't worry much about the classic gray goo scenario. They see it as a useful thought experiment from the early days of the field, a way to think about the ultimate power of what they were trying to build. But they don't see it as a realistic engineering threat. The laws of thermodynamics, resource scarcity, and waste heat are powerful constraints. Nature already pushes up against these limits with things like bacteria, and bacteria have had a 3 billion year head start. It's unlikely that our first attempt at artificial life would be more efficient than they are. The more realistic threat, and also the more realistic benefit, comes from more limited, specialized nanobots. Bots that don't self-replicate in the wild. This is where the conversation shifts from doomsday scenarios to incredible possibilities. What if we could build these machines, but we kept them under tight control? What if they could only replicate inside a special chamber in a lab, where we feed them a specific fuel? Or what if we designed them not to replicate at all? We would build them in a factory, like we build cars, and then deploy them for a specific job. This is the vision that most serious researchers are working toward. The goal isn't to create artificial life. It's to create powerful new tools. Think about medicine. Imagine injecting a few million nanobots into your bloodstream. Each one is programmed to do one thing: find and destroy cancer cells. They patrol your body. When a bot bumps into a cell, it checks its surface proteins. Is this a healthy cell? If yes, it moves on. Is this a cancer cell? If yes, it latches on and injects a tiny dose of poison, killing the cell. Then it moves on. This would be a perfect cancer treatment. No side effects, no damage to healthy tissue. It would be a true silver bullet. Or imagine nanobots designed to repair tissue. You have a heart attack, and part of your heart muscle dies. Doctors could inject nanobots that go to the site of the injury. They would act as a scaffold, guiding the remaining healthy cells to grow and rebuild the damaged tissue. Or they could even perform surgery at the cellular level, stitching torn cells back together. The environmental applications are just as amazing. We have massive islands of plastic floating in the ocean. What if we released nanobots that were programmed to eat plastic? They would break down the long polymer chains into simple, harmless molecules. They would need a power source, maybe sunlight, and they would need a kill switch, a built-in timer, so they would all deactivate after a few years once the job was done. We could clean up oil spills, remove pollutants from the air, and even capture carbon dioxide to fight climate change. And then there's manufacturing. This was Drexler's original vision, the molecular assembler or fabricator, and a box on your desk. You pour in raw materials, some cheap chemicals, some carbon feedstock. You download a design from the internet, a new phone, a steak, a diamond ring. The assemblers inside the box get to work. They pull the molecules they need from the feedstock and, atom by atom, build the object you requested. It would be in a scarcity. Anything you could design, you could build, almost for free. It would completely change our economy and our society. This is the promise of nanotechnology. It's not about gray goo, it's about precise molecular level control over matter. So, where are we on that journey? We are at the very, very beginning. What we call nanotechnology today is mostly material science. It's about creating particles and structures at the nanoscale that have useful properties. We have nanoparticles in sunscreen that block UV light better. We have carbon nanotubes that can make materials stronger. We have special coatings that repel water. These are passive materials. They don't have motors or computers. They are not nanobots. The closest we have come to a true nanobot are some of the experiments in medicine. Scientists are developing nanocarriers that can deliver drugs to specific cells. These are basically tiny molecular cages that are designed to open up only when they reach their target. This is a huge step forward, but it's still a long way from an autonomous, self-powered robot. The path to building a true nanobot, let alone a self-replicating one, is probably centuries long. We need breakthroughs in a dozen different fields at once. We need new ways to model molecular physics. We need new fabrication techniques. We need new programming paradigms for molecular computers. We need to solve the energy problem, the sticky fingers problem, the information problem. It's a mountain of a challenge. Some argue it's an impossible one. They believe that the wet, messy, and flexible world of biology is simply better suited for work at the nanoscale. They think the future is in synthetic biology, not mechanical nanobots. Synthetic biology is about re-engineering existing life, taking the machinery that nature has already built, like proteins and DNA, and tweaking it to do new things. It's about working with life, not trying to build it from scratch out of diamond. Maybe the solution will be a hybrid, a machine that is part mechanical, part biological, a tiny chassis made of diamondoid, powered by a modified ATP system borrowed from a cell, with a DNA-based computer. We would be borrowing the best ideas from nature and combining them with the strengths of our own engineering. So, could we build self-replicating nanobots? The answer is a qualified maybe. We don't know how to do it yet. We may never know how. The physical and engineering challenges are monumental. And even if we could, the classic gray goo scenario is probably not the real danger. The laws of physics provide a pretty good safety brake. Waste, heat, and resource scarcity would likely prevent a runaway chain reaction. The real conversation we need to have is about control. Any powerful technology can be used for good or for bad. Nanotechnology is no different. The more likely threat is not an accidental apocalypse, but a deliberate one. A weaponized nanobot, a gray plague designed to attack people, or crops, or infrastructure. This is a much more plausible and immediate danger. If a nation or a terrorist group developed even a very simple, non-replicating nanobot designed for harm, it would be a terrifying new kind of weapon. That's why the discussions about ethics and safety are just as important as the scientific research. We need to think about these problems now, long before the technology is a reality. We need to build in safeguards from the very beginning. Kill switches, limited replication, control mechanisms. The story of self-replicating nanobots is a classic story about technology. It's a story of immense promise and immense peril. It forces us to ask what we want our future to look like. Do we want a world where we can cure any disease and build anything we can imagine? Of course. Do we want a world that could be accidentally devoured by its own creations? Of course not. The challenge is figuring out how to get the first without risking the second. For now, the world is safe from gray goo. Our technology is still clumsy and primitive at the atomic scale. We are still just learning the alphabet of molecular engineering. It will be a long, long time before we can write a sentence, let alone a story as complex as self-replication. But the idea is out there. The thought experiment is on the table, and it's a powerful reminder that with great power comes great responsibility, especially when that power is the power to build, and the power to copy, and the power to grow.